My parents took me to court over a truck, a 2021 Ford F-150 Lariat that I bought outright with $78, $400 of my own money after 8 years of saving every penny. They lost spectacularly. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow that seemed fitting for what was about to happen. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney David Morrison, a man whose reputation for dismantling frivolous lawsuits had come highly recommended. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their lawyer, a young guy named Trevor Walsh, who looked fresh out of law school and increasingly uncomfortable as he shuffled through his papers. My mother, Linda, wouldn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her jaw set in that stubborn line I'd known my entire life. My father, Robert, kept glancing over with an expression that might have been regret, though it was hard to tell anymore. Between them sat my older brother, Kenneth, who had apparently taken time off from his sales job to support them in this absolute circus. The judge entered, and we all stood. Judge Patricia Holbrook was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every flavor of family drama the legal system had to offer. She looked over her reading glasses at the assembled parties with what I can only describe as weary anticipation. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who wasn't going to tolerate any nonsense. "We're here for Fletcher versus Fletcher, civil case number 2024 CV3847. Mr. Walsh, you're representing the plaintiffs. Please proceed with your opening statement." Trevor stood tugging at his tie. "Thank you, Your Honor. My clients Robert and Linda Fletcher are seeking ownership of a 2021 Ford F-150 Lariat, currently in the possession of their daughter, Stacy Fletcher. The vehicle was purchased with funds that the plaintiffs claim were intended as a family investment, and—" "Your Honor," David interrupted, standing smoothly. "If I may, the defense would like to note for the record that Miss Fletcher has documentation proving sole purchase of the vehicle with funds from her personal bank account. We have bank statements, the original bill of sale registration documents, and insurance papers all in Miss Fletcher's name alone." Judge Holbrook held up a hand. "I'll review all evidence in due course, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Walsh, continue." But Trevor had lost his momentum. He fumbled through an explanation about parental expectation and family contribution that grew increasingly vague as he went on. The truth was, they didn't have a case. They had entitlement and audacity, but not a case. Let me back up and explain how we got here. 8 years ago, I was 22 years old, working 2 jobs, and living in a cramped studio apartment that smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant downstairs. I worked full-time as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized insurance company and picked up weekend shifts at a retail store that sold outdoor equipment. Every spare moment went to freelance bookkeeping work I did from my laptop at 2 in the morning. The money went into a savings account I'd opened at a credit union across town, far from the bank my family used. I'd learned early that privacy was essential in the Fletcher household. Kenneth had always been the golden child. When he wanted to start his own business selling supplements online, our parents emptied their retirement account to give him $40,000. The business failed within 18 months. When he needed a new car after wrapping his Mustang around a telephone pole while texting, they co-signed a loan and made half the payments themselves. I asked once for help with community college tuition, $500 for a single class. My mother had looked at me like I'd requested funding for a trip to Mars. "We're tapped out from helping your brother," she'd said. "Besides, you're smart. You'll figure it out." So I did figure it out. I took online courses while working, paying as I went. I got my associate degree in accounting over 4 years of night classes and weekend study sessions. I learned to survive on rice and beans and day-old bread from the bakery that sold discounted goods every Sunday evening. Every bonus, every overtime hour, every tax refund went into that account. I watched it grow with a satisfaction that felt almost spiritual. $10,000, $28,000, $40,000. I lived like a monk, and I didn't care because I had a goal. I wanted a truck. Not just any truck, but a specific one. A 2024 Ford F-150 Lariat in antimatter blue with a 4-wheel drive package, upgraded interior, and the towing capacity that could handle anything I needed. I'd picked out the exact model 3 years before I could afford it, and I visited the dealership every few months and just to sit in the display model and imagine. The sales guy, a patient man named Harold, got to know me. He never pushed, never made me feel stupid for my ritual. "You'll get there," he'd say. "I can tell you're the kind of person who makes things happen." On March 14th of last year, I walked into that dealership with a cashier's check for $78,400. The look on Harold's face was worth every early morning and every missed night out, with friends I'd never had time to make. "You did it," he'd said, shaking my hand so vigorously I thought my arm might detach. "I knew you would." Driving off the lot in that truck felt like vindication. The leather seat still had that new car smell. The engine purred with restrained power. Everything about it was mine, earned through sacrifice and discipline that no one had taught me because I'd had to learn it alone. I made one mistake. I drove it to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Kenneth was there with his girlfriend Brittany, a woman who worked part-time at a yoga studio and complained constantly about how expensive organic food was. They both came outside when I pulled into the driveway, drawn by the sound of the engine. "Holy hell," Kenneth said, walking around the truck with his mouth slightly open. "This is yours." "Every penny of it," I confirmed, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. My mother appeared on the front porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Stacy, what on earth did you do?" "I bought a truck, Mom. Paid in full." She descended the stairs slowly, her expression unreadable. My father emerged behind her, and I watched his face cycle through surprised confusion and something else I couldn't quite identify. "How much did this cost?" Linda asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The sticker price was $82,000, but I negotiated down to $78,400, I said. Got them to throw in the extended warranty. "And you spent $78,000 on a truck." My mother's voice had risen to a pitch that sent neighborhood dogs into alert mode. "Are you out of your mind?" "It's my money, Mom. I saved for 8 years. 8 years? Kenneth laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Where the hell did you get that kind of money? You work a secretary job." "Administrative professional," I corrected, feeling my jaw tighten. "And I worked 3 jobs for most of those 8 years. I saved something you might not be familiar with." "Don't you dare talk to your brother like that," Linda snapped. "This is ridiculous, Stacy. You should have invested that money, bought a house, something sensible." "I bought what I wanted with money I earned." Robert finally spoke, his voice measured in that way that meant he was about to say something he thought was reasonable but absolutely wasn't. "Sweetheart, your mother's right. This is excessive. A truck like this is a family asset. We could all use it. Kenneth needs a reliable vehicle for his deliveries, and we could borrow it when we need to haul things from the hardware store." The presumption stole my breath for a moment. "This isn't a family asset, Dad. This is my truck. I'm not lending it out like a library book." "Family shares," Linda said, her voice taking on that martyr tone that had guilt-tripped me throughout childhood. "We help each other. That's what the Fletchers do. Or have you become too good for your family?" "I help myself since my family made it clear that's my only option." I shouldn't have said it. The dinner that followed was arctic, filled with pointed silences and passive-aggressive comments about selfishness and forgetting where you came from. I left early, and I didn't visit again for 3 months. During those months, my phone rang constantly. Linda called to tell me about things Kenneth needed to move. Robert called to ask if I was done with my tantrum. Kenneth himself sent a series of texts that started with asking nicely to borrow the truck and devolved into accusations that I was flaunting my wealth and rubbing their noses in it. I blocked their numbers after Kenneth sent a message at 11 on a Tuesday night that read, "You know what, fuck you and your stupid truck. Hope you crash it." Then came the letter from Trevor Walsh, attorney at law. It arrived on a Tuesday in October, delivered by certified mail. The return address meant nothing to me until I opened it and saw the words, "Complaint for declaratory judgment and ownership determination." My parents were suing me for the truck. The legal theory, such as it was claimed that my savings had been accumulated during times when I lived in their house rent-free. Therefore, they had an equitable interest in anything I purchased. They claimed I'd made verbal agreements to share major purchases with the family. They suggested I'd somehow tricked or manipulated them out of what was rightfully a family vehicle. None of it was true. I'd moved out at 19 and paid my own rent ever since. I'd never made any agreement to share anything. The entire lawsuit was a fantasy built on entitlement. I called David Morrison that same day. His consultation was direct and brutal in its honesty. "Do they have any documentation of these claims?" he asked. "No, because I never lived rent-free and I never made any agreements." "Bank statements in your name only?" "Yes, a separate account they don't even know about. Title and registration in your name." "Only mine. Has been since day one." David leaned back in his chair. "Miss Fletcher, this case is going to cost them a lot of money they're about to lose, and it's going to cost you some money you're going to recover. I can have this dismissed, or we can let them go to trial and make an example of how frivolous lawsuits waste everyone's time. Your choice." "Trial," I said without hesitation. "I want them to sit in a courtroom and explain to a judge why they think they deserve my truck. That's going to create a permanent rift in your family. The rift's already there, I'm just making it official. So there we sat in Judge Holbrook's courtroom 6 months later as Trevor Walsh tried valiantly to construct a legal argument from smoke and wishes. He called my mother to the stand first. Linda took the oath with a trembling hand, and I almost felt sorry for her until she opened her mouth. We raised Stacy to understand family values. She began dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. We taught her that what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. When she bought this extravagant vehicle without even consulting us, it was a betrayal of everything we'd instilled in her. Mrs. Fletcher, David said when it was his turn, did you ever provide any money directly toward the purchase of this vehicle? Well, no, but did you co-sign the purchase agreement? No. Did your daughter ever at any point tell you she was buying this truck as a family vehicle? Linda hesitated. She didn't have to say it, it was understood. Understood how exactly? Because that's how families work. Is it? David retrieved a document from his folder. Mrs. Fletcher, do you recognize this bank statement? Linda squinted at it. No. This is from your daughter's personal savings account at Riverside Credit Union. Notice the dates. These deposits span from January 2017 through March 2024, over 7 years of consistent saving. Notice also that this account has only one name on it, Stacy Fletcher. Did you know about this account? No, but that doesn't... Did you contribute to this account at any time?
No, I did not.
Did you provide your daughter with free housing during the period these savings accumulated? She lived with us until she was 19, and after that she moved out. So for the years between ages 19 and 30, when this money was saved, she paid her own rent, though the bulk of savings happened after age 22, when she began working multiple jobs specifically for this goal. Yes. Paid for her own food, utilities, education. I suppose so. You suppose, Mrs. Fletcher, did you or did you not provide financial support to your daughter during the 8 years she saved for this vehicle? Linda's face had gone red. We provided emotional support. That's not what I asked. Financial support. Money. Did you give her money? No. Did she ever ask you for money? The silence stretched too long. Linda glanced at her lawyer, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. She asked once, Linda finally admitted, for college tuition. And what did you tell her? We couldn't afford it at the time. David nodded slowly. Because you'd just given $40,000 to your son Kenneth for his business venture. Correct. Objection. Trevor had found his voice. Relevance. I'm establishing a pattern of financial support within the family, Your Honor, David said. It's directly relevant to the plaintiff's claim that this was understood to be a family purchase. I'll allow it, Judge Holbrook said. Answer the question, Mrs. Fletcher. Yes, Linda whispered. We helped Kenneth with his business. 40,000. Yes. And how much of that has been repaid? That's not relevant. I'll decide what's relevant, the judge interjected. Answer the question. None of it, Linda admitted. The business didn't work out. David pulled out another document. And 6 months later, you co-signed a car loan for Kenneth when he totaled his previous vehicle, a loan for $32,000. How much of that loan have you personally paid? About half. So $16,000. Plus the $40,000 for the business that was never repaid. And according to these bank records, an additional $34,000 in smaller amounts over the years for rent, utilities, and various opportunities. You've given your son Kenneth $90,000 over the past 8 years. Is that correct? We helped him because he needed it. But you told your daughter you couldn't afford $500 for a community college class. Linda's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. No further questions. Trevor tried to rehabilitate on redirect, asking questions about how worried they'd been about my financial responsibility and how they'd only sued because they cared about my future. It rang hollow in the sterile courtroom, especially when David produced my credit report showing a score of 8 and 12 and 0 debt. My father's testimony was shorter, but no less damning. He tried to claim that in their culture, family assets were shared until David asked him to name a single other major purchase I'd made that I'd been expected to share. Robert couldn't name one because there weren't any. Everything I'd ever bought, I'd bought alone and kept alone. Kenneth wasn't called to testify, but his presence in the courtroom was its own statement. He glared at me the entire time, arms crossed, as if I were the villain in this scenario. What none of them knew was how close I'd come to breaking during those 8 years of saving. There were moments when the loneliness felt crushing when I'd scroll through social media, seeing former high school classmates at weddings and beach vacations, while I ate generic cereal for the 3rd meal in a row. I remembered being 24, sitting in my studio apartment on Christmas Eve. Kenneth had posted photos of the family dinner I hadn't been invited to because I'd skipped Thanksgiving after an argument about my priorities. The post showed him opening gifts, a new laptop, expensive cologne, a leather jacket. The comments from relatives praised my parents' generosity. I'd stared at my own reflection in my laptop screen, tears running down my face, and nearly transferred $5,000 from my savings to book a vacation somewhere warm, somewhere I could pretend to be someone else for a week. Someone who didn't eat ramen 4 nights a week and wear secondhand clothes. But I didn't. I closed the laptop, went to bed, and woke up the next morning to work a double shift at the outdoor equipment store because holiday pay was time and a half. And the discipline required to maintain that level of sacrifice for over 7 years had hollowed me out in some ways. I'd missed birthday parties because I couldn't afford gifts. I'd turned down dates because dinner and a movie cost money better spent elsewhere. I'd watched my 20s slip past in a blur of spreadsheets and shift schedules while everyone else seemed to be living. My coworker at the insurance company, a woman named Deborah, had noticed. She was in her 50s, kind, in the way that comes from having survived her own hardships. One day during lunch, I was eating a sandwich I'd made from discount bread and bargain deli meat. She'd sat down across from me. "Honey, I've been watching you for 3 years now," she'd said gently. "You never take vacation. You never splurge on lunch. You wear the same 6 outfits in rotation. What are you saving for?" I considered lying, but something about her expression stopped me. "A truck. A specific truck. I need 78,400. Deborah had whistled. "That's a serious goal. How close are you?" 52,000 as of last week. "And you've been doing this how long?" 5 years. She'd reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I did something similar once. Save for a down payment on a house after my divorce. It took 6 years. People thought I was crazy, living in a tiny apartment, never going out. But the day I got those keys," she'd smiled, eyes distant with memory. "Worth every sacrifice. Don't let anyone tell you different." That conversation had sustained me through the final 3 years. When my mother called to guilt-trip me about missing Kenneth's 30th birthday party because I was working overtime, I thought about Deborah's words. When my father suggested I was wasting my youth by not traveling or dating, I remembered that validation. The outdoor equipment store had its own ecosystem of characters who'd shaped those years. My manager, Pete, was a former Marine who'd taken a liking to me because I showed up on time and worked hard. He'd given me extra hours whenever possible and taught me about the camping gear I sold with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a religion. "You know what separates successful people from everyone else?" he'd asked one slow Tuesday afternoon. "It's not talent or luck. It's the ability to delay gratification. Most people see something they want, and they finance it, put it on credit, convince themselves they deserve it right now. But the ones who actually build something, they wait, they sacrifice. They stick to the plan even when it hurts." Pete had been the one who encouraged me to take that final step into the dealership when my account hit 78,000. "You've been talking about this truck for 2 years, he'd said. "Go get it. You earned it." Walking into that dealership with the cashier's check had felt surreal. Harold had spotted me from across the showroom floor, and his face had lit up like I was a celebrity. "Today's the day," he had asked, though he could probably read it in my expression. Today's the day. The paperwork had taken 3 hours. Every signature felt momentous. The finance manager, a balding man named Craig, had tried one last time to convince me to finance instead of paying cash. "You could invest that money, earn returns, and make small payments instead," he'd suggested. I'd agreed, but I won't. This truck gets paid in full, owned outright, no debt. Craig had shrugged. "Your credit score won't benefit, but I respect the principle. Wish more people thought like you." When Harold handed me the keys, I'd actually cried. Standing there in the dealership office, blubbering like a child, while Harold pretended not to notice, and Craig discreetly offered tissues. 8 years of sacrifice crystallized in that moment. Every missed party, every declined invitation, every night of beans and rice, every extra shift, every lonely holiday. "Take your time," Harold had said kindly. "Sit in it. Get comfortable. This is your victory lap." I'd sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes before starting the engine. The leather was butter soft. The dashboard was sleek and modern. The steering wheel felt solid and real under my hands. Everything about it screamed quality and permanence. Driving it home that first time, I'd taken the long route 45 minutes instead of 15, winding through neighborhoods and alongside the river, just feeling the truck respond to every input. The power was intoxicating. The handling was smooth. At a stoplight, a guy in a Mercedes had given me an approving nod, and I felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost embarrassing. That pride had lasted exactly 4 days until I'd made the mistake of driving it to Sunday dinner. I should have known better. My family had a pattern of treating my achievements as either threats or communal property. When I'd gotten my associate degree, my mother's first comment had been, "Well, Kenneth has a bachelor's degree, so you're still behind." When I'd gotten promoted to administrative assistant with a raise, my father had immediately asked if I could loan Kenneth money for his failing business. But I'd wanted them to see it. Some stupid, childish part of me had wanted my parents to be proud, to acknowledge that their daughter, who they'd written off as the lesser child, had accomplished something significant. Instead, I'd gotten accusations of selfishness and a lawsuit. The months between that dinner and the court date had been their own kind of hell. My phone had rung constantly until I blocked their numbers. Linda had shown up at my apartment twice, pounding on the door and shouting about family loyalty until my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, threatened to call the police. Kenneth had been worse in some ways because his attacks came through mutual acquaintances. He told our cousin Melissa that I'd stolen from the family to buy the truck. He posted vague Facebook statuses about people who forget where they came from and greed destroying families. Friends from high school, who I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly messaged me asking if it was true that I'd refused to help my struggling family. I drafted a response explaining the truth a dozen times. Each time I deleted it instead of posting. Let them think what they wanted. The people who mattered would ask me directly, and the ones who didn't weren't worth convincing. Only 3 people had asked directly. Deborah from work had bought me coffee and listened to the whole story without interrupting, then said simply, "Sounds like you're better off without them." Pete had been more blunt. "Your family's a bunch of leeches. Cut them loose." And my Aunt Paula, my mother's sister, had called me from Arizona, where she'd moved to escape the Fletcher family drama years ago. "Your mother called me crying about this truck situation," Paula had said without preamble. "I told her she was being ridiculous and she hung up on me. So I'm calling you to say congratulations on the truck, and I'm sorry your parents are insane." Paula had been the black sheep of her family for marrying someone they deemed unsuitable and moving across the country. She sent me cards on my birthday when my own parents forgot. Hearing her voice had made me cry harder than I had in months. "They gave Kenneth everything," I'd sobbed into the phone. "Everything. And they couldn't spare $500 for me. Not once." "I know, sweetheart. Your mother has always played favorites. It's not about you, it's about her and her need to feel needed. Kenneth makes her feel needed because he's useless without her. You threaten her because you're competent. That's messed up. Families usually are, but you're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to thrive without them dragging you down." Paula had been right, though it had taken the lawsuit to make me see it clearly. David Morrison had been worth every penny of his retainer. Our first strategy meeting had lasted 2 hours, during which he'd methodically destroyed every possible argument my parents could make. "They're going to claim emotional manipulation," he'd said. "They'll say you were raised with certain values and expectations. We counter with the fact that you've been financially independent since 19, and they've never supported you. They'll say it's a family vehicle. I'll add it," he'd said. "We show the title registration and insurance, all in your name. We show the purchase agreement, also you. We bring in your bank statements showing the systematic saving. We paint a picture of a daughter who pulled herself up without help and now faces parents who want to claim credit for her success. They're going to say I'm being selfish. Probably, but selfishness isn't illegal. And it's not grounds for claiming ownership of property you purchased. Let them say it. Let them look petty and grasping in front of a judge. It only helps us." The discovery process had been illuminating in disturbing ways. David had subpoenaed my parents' financial records, and what emerged was a portrait of fiscal irresponsibility that explained a lot about Kenneth's failure to launch. Beyond the $40,000 for his business and the $16,000 in car payments, my parents had been giving Kenneth money constantly, $500 here for rent, $300 there for utilities, $1,000 for a business opportunity that had evaporated. Over the 8 years I'd been saving, they'd given him an additional $34,000 in smaller increments that they'd never tracked or expected back. Meanwhile, I'd asked for $500 once and been told they were tapped out. David had included all of this in our court filings. The disparity was so stark it looked fictional. One child received $90,000 in support as an adult. The other received nothing and was now being sued for a truck she purchased independently. "This is going to hurt them," David had warned me. "When this becomes part of the public record, people will see these numbers. Your extended family, their friends, everyone. Are you prepared for that? Oh, sí. They sued me for my truck, I'd replied. They chose public record. I'm just defending myself. The deposition of my parents had been scheduled for 2 weeks before trial. David had questioned them for 6 hours combined, and I'd sat in the conference room, watching them slowly realize they had no case. Trevor had objected constantly, but there wasn't much he could do when the questions were straightforward and the answers were damning. Mrs. Fletcher, you stated in your complaint that Stacy had a pattern of making major purchases without consulting the family. Can you name another major purchase she's made in the last 10 years? Linda had faltered. Well, Take your time. She bought a laptop once. A laptop. And did she consult you about that purchase? No. Did you expect her to share that laptop with the family? Of course not. It was a laptop. But you expect her to share a truck. A truck is different. It's useful to everyone. So the determining factor of whether something should be shared is your personal assessment of its usefulness to the family. That's not what I meant. What did you mean, Mrs. Fletcher? The deposition transcripts were brutal. Reading them later, I'd felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because they conclusively proved I was right. Sadness because they also proved my parents had genuinely convinced themselves they were entitled to my property. Robert's deposition had been worse in some ways because he tried to play the disappointed father card. I just don't understand when Stacy became so cold, he'd said at one point, looking at the camera as if playing to a jury that wasn't there. We raised her to be caring and generous. This isn't the daughter we know. David had let that sit for a moment before responding. Mr. Fletcher, did you know your daughter worked 3 jobs for most of the period she was saving for this truck? She had jobs, yes. Did you know she lived on an extremely restricted budget, often skipping meals to save money? I don't know the details of her finances. Did you ever ask? Silence. Did you ever offer to help her? She never asked. Except for the one time she did ask for $500 for college tuition and you told her you couldn't afford it. Correct. We had just helped Kenneth. Yes, with $40,000. Robert's face had flushed with anger then. Kenneth needed that money for his future, and Stacy didn't need money for her education. The deposition had ended with Robert storming out and Trevor apologizing to David for his client's behavior. It had been clear even then that we'd win at trial. When Trevor rested his case, David moved for dismissal. Judge Holbrook didn't even need to recess to consider. I've reviewed all submitted evidence, she said, looking at my parents over her glasses. Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher, I want to be very clear. Your daughter purchased a vehicle with her own money from her own account without any financial contribution from you. The vehicle is titled solely in her name. She is the only insured driver. There is no written agreement, no verbal agreement that can be substantiated, and no legal theory under which you have any claim to this property. But Your Honor, Linda started to protest. I'm not finished. Furthermore, this lawsuit appears to be retaliatory in nature, filed because you disapprove of how your adult daughter chooses to spend money she earned independently. That is not a basis for legal action. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Miss Fletcher, you may file for sanctions and attorney's fees if you wish. We'll be filing immediately, Your Honor, David confirmed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in my chest. My parents left the courtroom without looking at me. Kenneth shoved past so close I could smell his cologne, the expensive kind he bought with money from our parents while claiming poverty. Trevor Walsh offered David a handshake and an apology for wasting everyone's time, which was as close to professional courtesy as the situation allowed. Outside the courthouse, David went over the next steps. We'll file for fees and costs. You'll likely recover most of your legal expenses. They'll get a bill from their attorney, too. This probably cost them $15,000 to $20,000 total. Good, I said and meant it. Any chance of reconciliation? With people who took me to court over a truck I bought with my own money. What do you think? He smiled grimly. I think you know how to protect yourself. That's a valuable skill. The sanctions hearing, 3 months later, was anticlimactic. Judge Holbrook awarded me $7,200 in attorney's fees and court costs. My parents were ordered to pay within 60 days. I never checked if they did. I assigned the judgment to David and told him to collect however he saw fit. Linda called once 2 weeks after the sanctions order. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a masterpiece of non-apology full of, I'm sorry you felt, and we were only trying to help, and I hope someday you'll understand. I deleted it without finishing. Robert sent a letter, actual paper, actual stamp. It rambled for 3 pages about family and forgiveness and how I was throwing away relationships over material possessions. I recycled it after reading the first paragraph. Kenneth sent nothing, which was somehow more honest than our parents' attempts. I still have the truck. It has 48,000 miles on it now, every one of them mine. I've driven it through 3 states, hauled furniture for friends who actually respect me, and taken it camping in the Smoky Mountains, where the isolation felt like peace instead of loneliness. Last month, I got a call from Harold at the dealership. He'd been promoted to sales manager and wanted to congratulate me on how well I'd been maintaining the truck and getting great use out of the extended warranty coverage I purchased. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. And when I hung up, I realized that conversation had more warmth in it than 8 years of family dinners. People ask sometimes if I regret how things turned out. The answer is complicated. I regret that my parents are the kind of people who would sue their own daughter over a truck. I regret that Kenneth is so steeped in entitlement that he can't see how his constant handouts from our parents damaged his own self-reliance. I regret that I was raised in a household where love was conditional on compliance and generosity flowed in only one direction. But I don't regret buying the truck. I don't regret defending my right to it. I don't regret letting a judge tell my parents that their expectations don't override my autonomy. The truck sits in my driveway right now, antimatter blue paint, gleaming in the afternoon sun. In a few hours, I'll drive it to my apartment park, it in my assigned space, and walk up to my modest but entirely mine 1-bedroom. Tomorrow, I'll drive it to my job, where I was promoted to senior accountant last year, with a salary that's letting me save for a down payment on a house. And when I buy the house, I'll do it the same way I bought the truck, with my money in my name, requiring no one's permission and owing no one an explanation. The Fletchers may think family means sharing everything. But I learned a different lesson. Family means supporting each other's independence, celebrating achievements, and respecting boundaries. My parents and brother failed at all 3. So I have a truck they tried to take and a life they can't touch. Some people might call that a hollow victory. I call it freedom.